Thanks for having me again. And I'm not sure why you keep inviting me back, especially since last time I made some pretty bold claims. If you'll recall, I suggested that the most pressing challenges we face today are spiritual in nature. That despite widespread prosperity, technology, and medical advancements, humankind is still suffering from a potentially fatal illness. The Kalahari Desert tribes call this illness the Great Hunger. Viktor Frankl called it the existential vacuum. And French sociologist Emile Durkheim described it as a malady of infinite desire. In this age of material abundance, what we lack are meaning, wonder, and a sense of connection, which I argue are to the soul as air, food, and water to the body. Without this nourishment, no amount of money, fame, or power can be fully enjoyed, let alone used wisely. If anything, our repeated attempts to fill the spiritual void with material goods and achievements seem only to exacerbate our laundry list of problems. And for those of you keeping score, those problems include chronic anxiety, depression, and boredom, terrorism and endless wars, climate change, extreme income inequality, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and racism, among other things. All of these stem from and are sustained by our ongoing spiritual crisis. Now, the remedy for this I suggested to you last time is religion, of all things, but not a religion that we inherited from our ancestors, nor one that is imposed upon us by some kind of central authority. What I proposed during my previous visit is a new religion crafted by you, the individual, to overcome your personal challenges and meet your specific spiritual needs. I shared with you my hope that Unitarian Universalism might serve as a breeding ground for this new religion. And then I invited you to regard our 7 principles as a foundation, and I encouraged you to start building on it. Upon reflection, I see that my invitation, even though it was well-intentioned, wasn't very helpful. Imagine I invite you over to my place for dinner, but I don't give you any other details. No address, no date, no time. Kind of hard to accept that invitation. So today I'd like to continue the same discussion I started last time, and hopefully fill in some of the blanks I left you with regarding religion building. Specifically, I want to talk about the function of mythology in religion, and then I want to give you a personal example of how we can tap into the old stories of our ancestors in a new way. So, for me, the process of making my own religion has been one of reconfiguration and reinterpretation. I haven't invented anything new. I'm not L. Ron Hubbard making up stories about aliens or anything like that. I've just gone around collecting bits and pieces from other traditions. And I've tried to make those bits and pieces align with our modern scientific understanding of the universe. I've also appropriated certain traditions and rituals that used to belong to other religions, like, for example, prayer and confession. I've taken these and I've put my own twist on them. I have my own Bible, just like you would expect a good religion to have, a panel of mentors and exemplars, a collection of principles to follow, and practices and rituals to keep all of this stuff front of mind on a daily basis. Now, a lot of people accuse religion of being a tool for controlling people. And in my experience, those people are absolutely right. In the hands of an authority figure, religion is a tool used to control other people. But in the hands of the individual, it's a tool of self-mastery and self-actualization. For this reason, I don't want to reinvent the tool. I just want to customize it to fit my life, my values, and my needs. So that's what religion building is all about in my world, or to me. Now, let's turn our attention to the glue that holds religion together. Stories, myth, parable, allegories. Stories, whether real or fictional, are the containers for the principles, the wisdom, and the tenets of religion. They embody the wisdom, insight, and inspiration of a faith tradition. So rather than just jot everything down point form, like a kind of spiritual grocery list, I go around looking for stories that embody the beliefs and the principles that I hold dear. Like the story of Viktor Frankl, to which I refer regularly. Pretty sure every time I come here I mention him, actually. His example helps me shoulder the relatively light burdens of my own life, right? Looking at his life, seeing what he went through, gives me the strength I need to get over the very minor inconveniences that I encounter. Now, mythology is a little bit different. Whereas Viktor Frankl is a real person who actually lived through the events written in his book, we can't say the same for the people and events described in the myths and fables of old. This, I suggest, is a moot point. The function of myth isn't to represent people and events accurately, but to represent profound truth and wisdom memorably. I can tell you that honesty is the best policy, or I can tell you the story of the boy who cried wolf. The first is just an idiom, very easy to forget. But the second, the story, will stay lodged in your mind after hearing it just once. That's the power of myth. And this can happen even when we don't fully understand the lesson that's hidden behind the story. Or at least it happened to me. Growing up without religion, I was nevertheless enchanted with the story of the Garden of Eden. Although I never believed it to be an accurate account of creation, it held a prominent place in my imagination throughout childhood. And then, when I was 14 or so, I had the good fortune of discovering a book, which was actually a transcript of several conversations that took place in the 80s between a journalist named Bill Moyer and a comparative mythological student, or teacher, I suppose, named Joseph Campbell. And this conversation originally aired on PBS. It was called The Power of Myth. Thanks to this book, I realized that there was more to myth than just the primitive attempts of our ancestors to explain things. When read allegorically, they contained hidden lessons and wisdom. Now, in the early pages of this book that I was reading when I was a young man, Campbell illustrated this allegorical way of looking at myth by giving us an interpretation of my beloved Garden of Eden story that was totally different from any other I had ever heard. This is the interpretation that lit my young mind on fire. The garden, Campbell suggested, was never a real place that existed in the Middle East or anywhere else for that matter. It's an internal place, a state of mind, a state of being that puts us in perfect union with nature. Adam was never really immortal, only ignorant. He had yet to become aware of his own mortality, yet to become aware of time and morality, good and evil. Campbell went on to say that the flaming sword that Yahweh placed at the entrance of the garden to prevent our re-entry is an illusion. And in fact, we can re-enter this garden at any time. So after reading this, I started to think about it, and over the years I've come to see that even though the story probably never took place, it's nevertheless essentially true. This realization didn't hit me all at once, of course. It took time. I had to keep accruing life experience. And perhaps the most validating experience that I can share with you today is that of being a parent, of watching the lives of my children unfold from birth to this very moment. Here's what I learned from that experience. We are all born in the garden. For the first 12 months of life, we recognize no distinction between self and other, between self and environment. Hungry? Cry. Nipple? Suck. What's this about good and evil, life and death? These things do not exist to the newborn. All that exists is the immediate experience of being, right here, right now. Whatever that is. A wet diaper, an empty belly, the warmth of a parent's chest. Now, even at the 12-month mark, when the child becomes aware of cause and effect, realizes that she is an agent in this world and that her actions have repercussions, the child is still completely innocent and carefree. Cause and effect. The child realizes, if I push this glass off the edge of the table, it's gonna fall. So that's what she does. She pushes the glass right off the table. She doesn't view her actions as right or wrong. She is merely interacting with her environment, which is an extension of herself. At the 18-month mark, a mother places her infant in front of a mirror, points to the infant's reflection in the mirror and asks, "Who's that?" The infant looks at her own reflection, then turns to her mother and points to her face, as if to say, "I'm you." Oneness, walking with God in the garden. The story of Eden is very cleverly written. It contains subtle hints at its hidden meaning. For instance, at one point, Adam goes around the garden naming all of the animals. This detail was pretty insignificant to me until after I had kids. Now Adam's behavior strikes me as strangely familiar. The first displays of linguistic expression in small children are exactly like this. The naming game. Mom, dad, cat, uppies, right? Adam naming all the animals is foreshadowing. It points to the cause of our eventual expulsion from the garden, and by extension, it hints at how we can make our way back there. It's all about the tree of knowledge and that dang forbidden fruit. The act of disobedience that got us kicked out of paradise and started what mainstream Christians call original sin. Of course, as I said, I like to change these things around for my own purpose, so here's an example of how I do this. To me, it's actually called original virtue. I got that one from Oscar Wilde. He wrote, "Disobedience in the eyes of anyone who has read history is humanity's original virtue. It is through disobedience that progress has been made, through disobedience and through rebellion." So there, no original sin anymore. You've all been absolved. Each and every one of us here, we defied nature. We ate from this tree, from the fruit of this tree. And at around the 36-month mark, we stepped out of the garden, out of the timeless paradise. We became distinct individuals with names and roles and stories. I'm Oliver, a 36-year-old cisgendered Caucasian male from Montreal, husband, father of 3, blah, blah, blah. A growing awareness of social norms, rules, and concepts lays waste to the garden. The weight of knowledge begins to press down upon the young child, and my friends, it only gets heavier as they grow up. The knowledge, not of good and evil, that's just one example. It's actually the knowledge of this and that, of me and you, life and death, success and failure, a metaphor for the development of denotative language, conceptual thinking, and our use of labels. The garden, of course, exists before symbols, before words, before ideas as we know and experience them today. The garden is the natural state of every living creature on this planet except for one that we know of. That's us, folks. Genesis is a story not of creation, but of evolution in my religion. The evolution of the individual from a state of blissful being to a state of troubled knowing. But that's not all. It's also about the evolution of our entire species, from animals living in perfect union with nature and this present moment, to animals imbued with self-awareness and the tools of language. Our use of these tools has created the appearance of duality, of these pairs of opposites that are constantly at war with each other, the past and the future, the self and the other, the true and the false. And this has forced us out of alignment with the oneness that is. This is not a form of punishment, by the way, for disobedience. It's a side effect of language and conceptual thinking, and I believe it can be remedied. To my knowledge, the pathway back into Eden isn't found in the Bible. But if we journey to the east a little ways, we will find many trails leading back in. Like, for example, there's this wise old comedian who lived in China long ago. And he said, nets are made for catching fish. Once you catch the fish, get rid of the net. Snares are made for catching rabbits. Once you've got the rabbit, get rid of the snare. Words are made for catching meaning. Once you've got the meaning, get rid of the words. Words, ideas, symbols, beliefs, these are excellent ways for us to represent pieces of the world, aspects of the whole. But as the British philosopher Alan Watts once said, the menu is not the meal. It definitely represents the meal, but you're not going to eat the menu anytime soon. So when I lose sight of this fact, I get tangled up in my own net. I start to suffer needlessly, stress needlessly, and this results in me overlooking the beauty and the goodness and the wonder that is present at this very moment, here and now. I am. Whatever I add to that proposition, the nouns and adjectives at my disposal are really useful tools, but they're not real. They're vehicles for meaning, not semantical prisons. At any time, I can set these things aside. Follow my breath beyond thought to the stillness of the present moment. No past, no future, no judgment, and no problems. My soul is at rest, my mind clear and expansive when I return to Eden. So, that's just one example of how we can take these timeless stories, these powerful myths, and update them to fit our modern needs. This is how we can take a familiar story or a symbol and imbue it with personal meaning and significance. And when I do this, I find that these stories, these symbols, they come alive with new life and new power, and they help me live well.